Again, welcome to the seasoned activist and young activist sessions. I'll leave it to your imagination, who's the seasoned activist and young activist. But at the end of the day, one of our previous sessions that we had uh, a few months ago with Bill Fletcher, a very esteemed union organizer, he made it very clear to me that he had just seen his primary care physician and he was feeling very young right at that moment. So just want to welcome everybody. And I want to first of all acknowledge that today is a very sad day of what occurred on October 7th in the Middle East. And I want to acknowledge that the suffering on both sides is just unbearable. And I want to highlight that. The loss of innocent lives really should not go unmentioned. It's for some of you who know me, I work in the Middle East also, and it's just a very difficult time. But I want to acknowledge that date, and I want to acknowledge the loss of innocent lives on all sides. So I want to thank you for joining at this time. What I'll be doing is I'm going to first of all start out by showing a few slides. For those of you who are motivated, I'd like to encourage you to contribute to the Movement Voter Fund and Vote ER, and I'll just give you a very brief background on both of them. And then I will introduce Daniel Stone and Calvin Sun. One of the wonderful parts of this work, which I consider to be fun, others, might not consider this work of politics to be fun, but is meeting amazing people like Dan Stone, who I've known for a number of years now, and Calvin Sun, who I've just met a few months ago for the first time. So I'll briefly introduce them, and they will introduce themselves more fully. What will happen then is that they'll each present for 5 or 10 minutes or so, and they'll have questions and amongst themselves. And then I would recommend we have a nice group of people who are absolutely interested in the topic tonight. And I would encourage all of you to speak up. Certainly, you, Cynthia Mahoney, you sent me a nice email. First, feel free to highlight in the chat, when we have the conversation, some of the important resources that you turned me on to. So I want to definitely welcome that later on. But first, what I'd like to do is share with you the slides that I'm going to show you. Let's take a look here. I am screening. Dan, can you see the slides or not?
I can. Yes, I can.
Good. Okay. So I just want to take no more than 5 minutes to tell people about the Movement Voter Fund and the Vote ER. These are two organizations that I believe in, and just would like you to consider some of the work that they're doing. And I know that Michael Kane is on the line. If you'd like to briefly say anything about that, you're welcome to, Michael, after I finish these slides. The important point, the key point for the Movement Voter Fund is that they fund local groups. And local groups that can really make an impact within their community and definitely make a political difference. But end of the day, we know, it all makes common sense, that local organizers know their neighbors, and that issues motivate voters. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to say, or what they're trying to say, and I definitely believe in it, is that we need a combination of issues and knowing your neighbors. That's the key in terms of making a difference. So issues by themselves, I'm sure you know by now, certainly, at this late date, that issues are necessary but not sufficient. But knowing your neighbors is absolutely key. And so having that combination together is really helpful. Organizers build powers that grows each year. So these are community-based organizations that do not just work, for a few months before the election. They have to work year after year after year, and they deserve our support. And the Movement Voter Fund works to provide support to these community-based organizations throughout the United States. The Movement Voter Fund model is to target the places most in need of civic investment, invest in the best local voter organizing groups, organize voters who bear the brunt of injustice, and then win advances in democracy, equity, and sustainability. One example is VoteER. It's exactly what it's an amazing organization, one that once the November election occurs, I'm hoping to totally get where I see patients to be totally a subscriber. And that's Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, Massachusetts. And VoteER provides nonpartisan tools for voter access within our healthcare systems, leadership buy-in, how to talk to young voters, and special support for FQHCs or federally qualified health centers. Those are the key points that I wanted to highlight, but certainly if I just want to give Michael Kane an opportunity, if he has a statement that he'd like to make. In addition, I'd like to give him an opportunity now to say anything that he might like to say if he's available. And if not, what I'm going to do is go to Dan Stone and Calvin Sun. So there you go. Cynthia, tell us.
Actually, VoteER is what inspired our group to form. Really taught us about the importance of voting and democracy in achieving our health goals and equity. So it's a great group. We're very strong supporters.
So it sounds great, and it is great.
Norbert,
yes, Michael, go for it.
I have nothing to add. You did a superb job. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm going to apply for a job then, for sure.
You should. You definitely should. We'd hire you.
Any event, one of the interesting things, and here's what we're going to get into a little bit, I'm sure, is the fact that I just got a call with a person who's on the board of directors of a large competitive state medical society. I'll be that specific. And they brought up VoteER at the board of directors meeting of the state medical society. Wow. And they said, no, VoteER is too partisan. And just by encouraging people to vote is partisan. I mean, what kind of situation do we live in to have that kind of situation? But in any event, that's the situation in some parts of the country, and we move on. But it's with great pleasure that I want to reintroduce Dan Stone, who I've known, I believe, Dan, since 2018. Is that right?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, that's when we started Ask Nurses and Doctors, and Dan has been extremely helpful working with lots of writers throughout the United States, and continues to be helpful with their op-eds, letters to the editor, and then Calvin Sun is a new colleague for sure. I'm certain that he's a new friend in short order. So I'm gonna turn to you, Dan, and then you can just hand it over to Calvin, and then we'll have some dialogue and then open it up for comments and questions.
Thanks, Robert. Just by the way, in my screen, there's a large unlocked workstation. I'm not sure if you can minimize that, or it might help people who might be distracted. But anyway, thanks so much, Norbert, and thanks for everything you do. I'm constantly amazed by your.
Interrupt you, but I just want to make sure. What did you say there was something?
Oh, I see my screen. I have a large unlocked workstation that I think is on your screen. I think. And do others see that?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah. So I think if you might hit, there's a box to hit OK. You might be able to, if you can see it, to minimize it or eliminate it. Because there we go. Great. Now we can. Now we can see it.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, I'm learning. I'm learning.
Great.
I've gone through the Zoom learning curve, as many of us have. So thank you. But anyway, yeah, thanks again, Norbert, for everything you do. You're a powerhouse, and we all benefit. So I'm so appreciative for what you do. And we're going to be talking, I think, about candidates, among other things, today. And I just want to mention right off the bat about one of the candidates I'm most enthusiastic about, which is Dr. Calvin Sun. I was speaking to Calvin about 60 seconds with Norbert when I realized this is somebody I have to contribute to. And that was even before I knew what a New York City public advocate was. Now I know I'm even more enthusiastic. So Calvin, do not feel embarrassed. Please, at the head, when you talk, put your the contribution information in the chat, and everyone who gets a feeling for Calvin's going to want to contribute to his campaign. He has a very exciting future. So just a little bit about me as a background. I've been interested in elective politics since 1968, when I first, as a child, did get out the vote for Hubert Humphrey. And pretty much ever since then, I've been involved in many campaigns. Ran for unsuccessfully for state assembly in 2000. I represented Congressman Henry Waxman on the Los Angeles County Democratic Party committee, and have done other activities. In 2000 was a landmark year. After seeing what happened in Florida, I decided that I could never personally allow that to happen again if there was anything I could do. And so since then, my friends, my cousin and sometimes others have gone out 4 different times. We've done canvassing starting in 2004. And this year we're going to, we found a good race, a couple of races in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, presidential, senatorial, congressional, and we're going out there on the 1st of November. So, and this comes from, what Michelle Obama said at the Democratic National Convention: do something. Though we only have one vote, and some people think that their one vote is significant enough, they don't bother, and yet there's so much more we can do. Yes, a political donation is a small thing, but it makes it your vote plus a donation. Doing telephone banking, doing canvassing, it's that plus. Those of us who can do that as a community, our collective efforts become very powerful. So let's all do those small things and show what our power can be when we do it collectively. So as I mentioned, turnout in the last election was 62%. That's the highest turnout since Franklin Roosevelt's first effort. So 38% of people in the last election didn't vote. So the way to win this election is to push that number up. At this point, most people have made up their minds. Yes, we want to try to convince the undecideds, the few that there are left, but really what it's about is doing everything we can to turn out. And Movement Voter Fund sounds like a great way to do that. By the way, I'm looking forward to making a contribution after the program's over. So we've held a Zoom here in the Cedars-Sinai, Los Angeles area to try to attract people. Our goal has been to do whatever we can to project our influence to the battleground states to try to move the election, to move the needle forward. And we identified 5 areas: recruit other people to work on the election, donate strategically, make phone calls, do phone banking, and canvassing. And so whatever anyone can do, doing something adds to the collective effort. There are lots of people. We've helped with a postcard project through Progressive Turnout Project, 40 million postcards. They increased propensity to turn out by 1.7% each. That's tens of thousands of votes, all going to target to battleground states. So small contributions, small efforts, add up in a big way. So I'll just say a few words about ways to leverage your small voice. Some of the things that we're encouraging people to do. So in regard to volunteering, a website that we like is the Progressive Turnout Project. I may be able to share their screen. If you go to, they are amazing in what they do. Let's see if I can share that. If you go to their website, you'll see all kinds of, see there, hopefully that's being shared. You'll see all kinds of opportunities. These are just the first page to do phone banking, to project your voice, to help get out the vote. In 2020, we couldn't go door to door because of COVID, so we did phone banking. It was very encouraging after doing hours of phone banking to get people to turn out in Georgia to see that we won that race by 11,000 votes. So your voice on, there's other options on here, so check out the website. That would be one that I would strongly encourage people to take a look at. And then in terms of contributions, I know a lot of us are getting constant solicitations for contributions, and we all want to try to contribute in the smartest possible way. And let me see if I can share this. One sec. So this is oath.vote. So oath.vote is a good way to target political contributions. Their concept is that coattails work both from top down and bottom up. So if you contribute to a state Senate race in Pennsylvania, that may push voters to the polls for Harris. So for example, or an assembly candidate may be able to get people to go to the polls for a local issue like a school issue, a traffic issue, or just because they went to the same college or high school. If we fund those people, it can make a difference at the top of the race. Unfortunately, the reality is by giving to Harris and Walz, although I do that, there's not the same kind of opportunity. But if you scroll to defeat Trump on their website here, you'll see the options that they give you are candidates for the House in North Carolina, Senate, state Senate in Pennsylvania, House in Arizona, and so forth. These are small candidates, and they need the funding. Your votes, your contributions are bigger when they go to people who need the money more and push turnout from the bottom up. So if you go to this and you hit donate now, it'll divide your donation among all 6 candidates, or you can target it if you want to specific. So think about oath.vote, just Google oath.vote, and you can get that website. Though that's how I by the way would not contribute to the state, to the Senate that way, because they're listing the major party candidates, and although I support them, it's not, doesn't have the same kind of advantage in regard to using the small races to leverage the top races. And then there's also there are other websites that allow you to do that, but that's a favorite of mine. And then one candidate I want to mention, I'm going to share a screen again. I think the best bang for the buck in regard to trying to hold the Senate this year is a candidate named Dan Osborne. Dan Osborne isn't getting the same attention in Democratic circles because he's not a Democrat. He's independent, but he will vote to organize the Senate for the Democrats. So, and if you take a look at, this is electoralvote.com, one of my favorite websites to follow electoral happenings around this time of the election, you'll see that amidst the blue desert of the central part of the United States, there's this one race that's blue. And if you click on it, you'll see that Dan Osborne has picked up amazing steam and is now leading in the polls. And they don't spend a lot of money on politics. And these races, and the spending is barely into 7 figures. Whereas if you look at the other major Senate races, there are tens of millions of dollars. So your donation to Dan Osborne is very cost efficient. And it's not being promoted so much by Democrats because he's an independent. But if you Google Dan Osborne, you can contribute to him either through the Democratic Party machinery, which is allowing him to use that, or directly to his campaign. So please think about Dan Osborne. He had a fundraiser here in Los Angeles, an interesting guy, very plain spoken. He's a machinist, union member, and just a very common sense, thoughtful guy running against a very unpopular incumbent. And he has some advantages in Nebraska race. The blue dot in Omaha is a potential electoral vote for Harris Walz. So Democrats are really pushing the turnout. That could help him. Secondly, there's an abortion referendum, so that will push women and other voters who care about reproductive rights to the polls. So think strongly about Dan Osborne. So again, I'll finish up just by saying that again, our small voices are powerful when we use them collectively. So I think everyone can get your friends and relatives to help contribute. Go on, do phone banking if you can, canvass if you can. Those on the east or close to Pennsylvania, that's where a lot of good work needs to be done. And I'm very enthusiastic about what Norbert's doing and the fact that we can do our part to make a big difference in this election. And with that, I'll turn over to my colleague, the candidate, Calvin Sun.
Thank you, Dan, Dr. Stone. Thank you, Norbert, for also hosting us, and everyone here for attending this Monday night to join us for a crucial discussion about why it's important that we are civically engaged, and not just on the on cycle. I mean, the presidential elections are getting all the attention, but also in the off cycles, where contributing and being civically engaged and voting every year and getting your colleagues, your neighbors, your loved ones to vote, not because it's all over the news and you feel it's important, but because it also affects the people around you. And locally, I feel our So it was always the national elections that we hear about in the news, but I feel what has more direct impact are our local elections. Those are the ones where you will see
Calvin?
immediate changes.
Calvin,
Uh,
sorry to interrupt you. Could I ask Dan Stone to delete his screen or stop sharing your screen?
And let me, yes, I will do that. My apologies.
That's
Okay.
okay. I apologize.
all right. And it's I think we can all agree that what's more important than our national elections are the local ones, where that has a direct effect on what we experience on a day-to-day lives. So off-cycle elections is quite important. And I'm saying that with a little bias because I'm running for the Office of Public Advocate for the city of New York, whose elections are next June and November, which makes it hard to fundraise and campaign for when all the attention and bandwidth is focused on the upcoming election that's in less than 30 days. So how about doing that balancing act and trying to convince the people around us that they have to maintain the energy levels even after this November and whatever the outcome is, to keep that going, to know that all hope is not lost if their favorite candidate doesn't win, because they still have a chance to change the trajectory of their destinies, of their daily lives, for themselves and their city by engaging in the other 3 years where they can vote for their local city council members, their state assembly members, and their mayors, and in this case, public advocate, which is a position in New York that's second to the mayor, that acts as a, I think for those of you who are following New York City politics, has a more of a spotlighted role now, in whose job is supposed to keep the mayor's office accountable. And we can all agree right now that there is a tremendous lack of accountability that our elected officials experience, a majority of whom who don't know what it's like to work with accountability. I mean, they say there is, and they wait until the next election to be held accountable. But it's very different to bring it back to why we're talking about this, is that we're both doctors. We swore an oath to do no harm. We swore an oath to our patients. We've been trained throughout medical school and residency, where every day we are held accountable, and there are consequences when we don't do it immediately, when we don't live up to that accountability immediately. Lives are at stake. And it boggles my mind how that doesn't translate to people who are in charge of our roads, our infrastructure, the passed laws that affect our taxes and housing and affordability, all of which are social determinants of health. And Daniel spoke to how every little bit counts, just do something. Well, isn't that like health, where you got to do a little bit of everything? It's not like I take a magic pill and everything gets cured. I mean, that's ideal. We all strive for that with drug research right now, but we can all agree that what makes someone healthy is all the small things that contribute to our healthy physical life. So exercise, eating healthy, access to non-processed food, and managing, mitigating stress, being a part of community, having purpose, and also managing all the medical history and surgical history and that adds up to it. And then we go beyond that, and the current day health outcomes that a person experiences is also affected by what's around them, their neighborhoods, the air quality, the access to public transportation, their access to affordable housing, feeling like if they can afford where they live. Those are all social determinants of health that colored my lens of why I want to advocate for New York City and run for office. I think also, given that we have short-term memory loss, but we had a pandemic within the past 4 years. It happened 2 years ago. I mean, it resolved 2 years ago. It started 4 years ago. And I think a lot of us have moved on from that. But I, as an emergency doctor, still remember it very clearly as it was yesterday, because it was an integral part of my experience and the deep reflections I formed in its wake of how government was extremely underprepared. And because it was underprepared, we lost so many lives unnecessarily. And had government been better prepared, we would have avoided the 2 years of turmoil that I think New York City is still reeling from. I think a lot of the stuff that you see in the news right now of New York's lack of direction is because of New Yorkers feeling discombobulated and time warped since the pandemic, that they don't know who to vote for, and they just have a serious lack of trust. Their faith in government has been shaken to its core. So I think from that experience has motivated for me to feel that government deserves better, that it deserves a candidate, that deserves an elected official. I hate to say politician, but a statesperson that knows how to advocate for the people that are put under their charge, such as a doctor who has a responsibility, who knows accountability, and also works with a sense of urgency that a career politician for the past 15 years does not understand. And it's right now feels like an emergency room on a citywide level, which is why there's more of a need for a newer generation of political candidates who are not just civically engaged, but also becoming part of the political process to change the direction. So definitely we need all the votes and we need all the canvassing to elect the leaders that we relate to and want to take up our goals for a better tomorrow, but also become those agents of change. And instead of waiting around for the next great hope, be that person. And it's hokey as that sound and cliche of being the change that you seek to be. And I would like to say, maybe we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And when the opportunity came about to run for this position that I feel has been sorely underutilized, and if you now see has been left with the current public advocate hasn't really used it to its fullest potential to hold the mayor accountable, so we could have prevented from what we are right now as a city. I think it provides a window of opportunity for a newer generation of people who know how to actually take ownership of position and making the most out of it, rather than waiting around for the right time and place to say something or do something. So, you know, a little bit, that's the reason why. I mean, for those of you who don't know my background, I'm an emergency room doctor, and I worked as a per diem doctor, never was really full-time to sign up for one hospital system. After residency, which was at Jacobi and Montefiore Medical Centers in the South Bronx, I worked as a per diem attending at Kings County Hospital, where I went to medical school, SUNY Downstate in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, East Flatbush, Bellevue, Lincoln, dozens of hospitals across 4 of the 5 boroughs. I worked one shift at Staten Island, so I guess I said all 5 boroughs. But the idea was to get a big picture of the city. And by the time the pandemic came around 2 years when I was an attending, I had the vantage point of being able to see what was going on the entire city. I mean, I see the entire city in my emergency room, but then I was also going to every emergency room in New York during one of the worst crises of our time, if not the worst, because I think more Americans died in the pandemic than World War II and the Civil War combined. And from that vantage point, I was able to speak and advocate for the city to the media, to all the organizations, and be as public as possible without getting into trouble. And I didn't realize that at the time, but the irony was you would get fired by speaking the truth of what was happening in your hospital on TV, by saying there was not enough PPE, or that colleagues were dying, or nurses were getting intubated. And you would get fired because you would be violating media clauses for speaking the truth without going through the media department of that hospital. Because I was attached to dozens of hospitals, they couldn't tie me to one place. So I was able to have the ability to speak to what was going on on the behalf of the city. And the hospitals were ironically getting all these PPE donations. And the administrators would come up to me and say, "You're doing great. We want to keep doing you, because they can't attach you to one place." And I realized there is an art of being able to do the right thing in a correct way that can preserve your integrity and bandwidth to be able to have your cup full to keep speaking truth to power while still doing your job without having to sacrifice anything. If there is a way of doing things that is holistic and powerful. And that what led to that visibility is what led to me eventually realizing there is a role for me in public office. Because right now we're facing so many crises in New York that feels like cycles of crises that I see in a patient that come to the emergency rooms. A lot of patients who come in emergency rooms, usually they're at the tipping point of their health because they have these underlying issues that have been underfunded or ignored. Well, that feels like a lot of the issues that same person, if not all of us, face as citizens of a city, that a lot of things have been underfunded and ignored. And those contribute to this daily chronic stress that we feel as citizens of New York that contribute to then poor health outcomes that bring people to the emergency room and then get $1 million workup to be told that they're fine because they're not actually having a heart attack, even though they have the symptoms of a heart attack, then be referred to a specialist, which then takes up more time. And that is why we wait months and months and months for a specialist to actually see a physical ailment when we could have saved billions of dollars in time if we had addressed the failures of government. If government actually worked to their potential, a lot of these social determinants of health can prevent these unnecessary emergency room and urgent care visits that are manifested as physical stressors. And those billions of dollars can then be reinvested into small businesses, healthcare startups to make the city even more efficient, and housing, affordable and safe housing so that New Yorkers don't have to worry about supply and feel like they can actually belong in the city and then give back to the city that has given them so much. And we get out of the cycle of crises and paying back debts into a cycle of positive feedback and investment to elevate on the hierarchy of needs so that we can move the city in a better direction. So that is my why. And,
Ask everybody to mute themselves unless they're speaking.
so that is my, yeah, that is my why. And the reason what I feel there's a sense of urgency right now to run for office, even for next year. I don't procrastinate as an ER doctor. So it's good to have not only just the resources of money, which is where we're currently at. Fundraising is part of the process, but also time is a valuable resource we don't talk enough about, just like we don't talk enough about stress as a factor in health. And we want to capitalize on both so that we can move the city in a better direction. No more populist call out culture, no more shame and blame, just targeted action so that we can best move the city forward into a healthy one that we all deserve. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So first of all, please put, as Dan suggested, Calvin, please put your information if anybody wants to make a donation.
Oh, Norbert,
Um,
I put the contribution link for Calvin into
Oh,
the
thank you. You
into
did
the
already.
chat.
Yeah.
It's
Oh.
right there. Encourage everyone, please click.
Secondly, you should also put the title of your book.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I
that's a fine contribution to the effort. So what I'd like to do is before you start asking questions, I'll just like to ask the following question to both of you. In a way, you answered it, Dan, already for yourself. But in these last 28 days, in addition to giving money, what are you doing personally in addition to going to Wisconsin? And the same thing applying for you, Calvin. Are you doing anything special in terms of the race, or are you understandably focused on your own race?
We're
Dan?
on it. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Calvin. You've got the screen. Go ahead.
Oh, I think I was just going Dan first. I think we're on the same team. I'm focused on my candidacy, but we are also engaged with sending me to battleground states over the next month to also help out with other candidates. I don't believe in my approach to politics and my experience with it ever since I was an activist since I was 16 years old. It doesn't exist in silos. We should build coalitions, and these intersections of your interests can align with mine can bring us all together. And there's a quote that I like to always say that my other life as an entrepreneur is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that is based on a community that I built in New York, which is predicated on getting people off of the tethers of social media. I mean, we use social media for outreach, but the ultimate goal is to get people to meet one another and develop strong relationships and bonds. That eventually became a community known as the Monsoon Diaries, which then became a book that was just published by HarperCollins. I'll put the link in the chat. It's this idea that we can't do it without one another. So as much as I am focused on my campaign, I think true investments need to be made in other candidates who have more urgent needs of winning this current cycle's election. So I do think that, if anything, the answer is to focus on other people's campaigns is already focusing on my campaign. Why does it have to be mutually exclusive?
Thank you. Dan?
Thanks, Calvin. That's great. Well, I've been trying to focus on the 5 things that I mentioned before. So, first to recruit other people. So I've tried to get my friends together. There's a lot of motivation out there. I think for those of us who try to recruit our friends and colleagues and family, we'll find more interest this year because this is the most important, it's a cliche, it's the most important election of our lifetime, but we've never had a twice impeached candidate. We've never had a felon on the ballot. We've never had someone who led an insurrection. So I think these are objective reasons. I think this really is the most important. So, usually when I've gone canvassing, as I mentioned, it was my cousin and me. This year, there's 6 of us going to Wisconsin. So there's a lot of interest. So you don't have to travel, though. I'm encouraging those who can't to sign up and do calls, as I mentioned, or to donate strategically and encourage your friends. I've been sending the link to those few things that I mentioned, the Osborne campaign, to the website I mentioned for oath.vote, to strategically give to lower level campaigns that you might not know about. So pass those along to friends. Anything that one does. I've been doing postcards. I tell other people to do postcards. So I do postcards. I try to do the things that I'm encouraging other people to do. So I think you sort of set yourself up as an example for those around you, show the energy, and get people going. I'm very optimistic about this. It's going to be a tight election, but we have more people on the ground. We have more money for turnout operations, and we also have the advertising. So I think it's all about turnout. I'm optimistic we'll turn out our people, but we can't forget about 2016. We were up the night before the election and we ended up losing because they did a better job of turning out their voters. So we can't let that happen again. We can't have 2000 happen again. So I'm trying to encourage everybody to do that, something you can do, whatever it is. And I think if we all do that, I think we're going to have success.
Before I turn it to others in the audience, do either of you have any questions of each other that you'd like to highlight, or any comments on each other's presentation that you would like to highlight?
Just to say to Calvin that I'm so enthusiastic to see an emergency room physician. I work with emergency room physicians all the time, and I'm amazed at how many things they can do so well. And to add to the surgical and medical and other skills that emergency physicians have, the political skills is obviously quite a tribute to Calvin. I think it's really an opportunity for people in New York City to take advantage of that. People trust physicians for a good reason. Most of us went into it for the right reasons. I can tell Calvin did. It's really an opportunity for New York. I hope people will recognize that, and I'm confident you'll get the message across, Calvin.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. That means a lot to me. It's very rare for an emergency room physician to hear inside the hospital kind words when we're trying to we actually are trying to discharge everyone home because that's much safer than keeping them in the hospital. But you don't see that. But thank you. It's also good to hear that outside the hospital, and that's what we're trying to do. In that, as a candidate, as someone in the political process, from the point of view as a doctor, is I know as much as I love treating emergencies, I now want to prevent them from happening in the first place. And if we can do that to keep our hospitals empty so that doctors can actually focus on what they signed up for rather than doing the God's work of social work and making sure that they have a safe place to go and shelter and in addition to their mental and physical health crises, then I think we can keep my colleagues sane and away from moral injury and burnout, as well as the community that is healthy enough that they take charge of their own health. And as you said, Dan, every little bit counts. We need all the avenues. And therefore, from the inside and outside of the hospitals, it's great to see other doctors who have been doing this for a while still are in the game, if not even more motivated and invigorated to do even more as time goes on. Because what I'm seeing in my colleagues and what's disheartening is that as their careers progress in our generation, the more burnt out they are, the more they're trying to find ways to not do medicine anymore, try to do something non-medicine, and finding that off-ramp that doesn't really contribute to a community because they've been so morally injured after the pandemic. And I want to change that direction because if that's the way things are going to go, we're not going to have much of a healthy and safe healthcare force anymore, because it's no longer inspirational to become a doctor these days, after the messengers are telling our students and pre-meds that if they were to do it again, they would have second thoughts. I want to change that conversation and dynamic, that if anything, I'm very grateful I decided to go to medical school, because it afforded me a way of looking at the world through a more holistic lens, to where if anything, taught me in a path of always giving more. And that being said, like, my question to you is, what are the biggest challenges that you felt as you progressed in your career, that you wanted to do more and add to your plate, when it feels like, for me as a younger physician, that the more I progress, the more overwhelmed I feel? And I'm trying to reframe myself by thinking of people like you, but it's hard, because practically just what are the day-to-day things that are challenging, that you are able to reframe, so that you're able to make that space for yourself to fill your own cup?
Well, that's a super good question, Calvin. I think the problem that we as physicians, one of the problems we as physicians have, is we tend to see healthcare on a person-to-person basis, because that's how we conduct it in our practices. And I think it was hard for me to try to put the more global picture together. And in trying to do that, I didn't mention in my biography, but I got a degree in public health from UCLA, and then an MBA here locally from Pepperdine, and to try to sort of get the full picture and understand the systemic issues. And I think it's good for us to encourage our colleagues, as I'm sure you're doing, because you have this kind of more global focus, to try to look not just at the patient in front of us, although we certainly need to have compassion on a one-to-one basis, is the foundation. But if you have compassion on an individual basis, you realize that you have to have access to health insurance. That's why the Affordable Care Act is so important to defend. And to get that, to combine that global perspective with a one-to-one compassion, that's sort of, I think, the magic that can make a physician's life come alive, and to help with that burnout issue.
Thank you to you both. I mean, and now you, I'm sure, just get a flavor of why I always say to myself, I'm the lucky one to have started Ask Nurses and Doctors, because otherwise I never would have met Dan Stone or Calvin Sun, and I'm sure all of you would agree. So this is now your time, and I want to highlight anybody who wants to speak, wants to think. I know Cynthia had some resources that she wanted to share, but anyone who wants to speak, just we are a nice small group, which is great. And just open the floor for any comments from anybody.
Norbert, I can chime in here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, Michael.
I think it was the 2020 election in Georgia. One of MVF's funded grassroots groups was called the Black Male Voter Fund. And they made a commitment to connect with every eligible Black male voter in Georgia, which numbered slightly over 400,000 of them. And they reached their goal. They actually connected with that group of over 400,000. And that translated, by their calculation, 50,000 Black men, eligible voters who'd never voted before. So that's the kind of deep grassroots work that Movement Voter Fund funds, and having people on the ground in their community who are doing that kind of work just makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Other comments or questions, particularly of the panelists, or any comments whatsoever? Welcome all considerations. Cynthia, did you want to highlight anything in particular from the email that you sent me earlier?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. First of all, I want to thank both of the panelists, Calvin and Dr. Sun and Dr. Stone. I actually trained in New York City at Albert Einstein, so that's near and dear to my heart, and now in California. And so what you guys were saying about the way that California and New York are both ignored when the congressional seats are so critical, that keeps me motivated. And just that, to what you were saying about burnout, that I think one of the really beautiful things about Vote ER is it's really at that intersection between how we take care of individual patients and the bigger picture, the public health, the social determinants that you spoke about so beautifully. And they talk about how it can really help with that moral injury, because you're not having to be the social worker and solve these problems, but you're pointing your patients to a way that they can have agency themselves. So I think it's a really, really great program. And along those lines, in terms of what else we can do, I work with a group that's a spinoff from Climate Health Now, which is part of the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. So we've been working on Get Out the Vote projects around health professionals and our patients through VoteER, and health professionals through the We Will Vote call to action pledge. And we're asking ourselves, well, what more can we do at the last 30 days? So one thing we've done is re-up a video that we actually created 2 years ago about why it's important for people to understand that climate impacts their health and so many other things. And that the solution to that is voting. So there's a video that I posted, a connection to a YouTube video that I'd love if people would look at and share with their groups, get that out in front of any audiences you can. That's been updated for 2024. And also we said, our physicians and nurses are trusted health professionals using our voice, that's our power. Could we encourage and help people do letters to the editor and op-ed? So we created, this is in association with people from Medical Society Consortium, state groups, we created letter to the editor templates and op-ed templates, which I've posted here. So if anybody wanted to take advantage of those, they're from a climate lens, but they could easily be transmuted into something else. Their letters range from 150 words to 250, so you can pick one that matches your own local media in terms of how long it can be, and then try and get that in. If we can get lots of people doing that, that might just make a difference in those small jurisdictions. And I have a question for you, Dr. Stone. You started out saying you've worked a lot on op-eds and LTEs, so I'd be interested in your experience and if you're working in that area now.
Well, I do. I send probably about 3 or 4 op-eds a year over to the LA Times, and I get 1 or 2 published. They're a tough market, as
Yes,
newspapers have shrunk. There's less and less space for op-ed pieces, but I do have a column that I write for the Los Angeles Jewish Journal, and so they're less picky than the Times are. So I'm actually working on an article about the current presidential campaign, sort of with the theme that a lot of the discussion is kind of an echo chamber. Unfortunately, a lot of the information we pass around just doesn't get to the people who might change their minds. That's why it's so important to do turnout of the people who do agree with us. So, but I still do what I can, and particularly, and focus us on this on women's issues and Trump, and obviously we know about the loss of Roe versus Wade. I also did a lot of activist work on RU46. Colleagues and I got together over 500 physicians to lobby the company that refused to allow it to come to the United States, and they released it to the Population Council probably about 30 years ago. So I'm certainly invested in that, but also looking at the fact that the Trump administration had only 2 women in its cabinet, and they were transportation and education, the traditional women's positions, which is, I think, stereotypical and not respectful to women. And the fact that only, I think, 22% of his 22 or 23% of his judicial nominees were women, that versus 44% for the Obama administration, well over 50% for the Biden administration. It's just clear that there's not a lot of respect there, nor for Hispanic voters. If you think about it, there wasn't a Latino or a Hispanic surname presence in the Trump cabinet, something that hasn't been true for over 20 years prior to Trump. So I'm not sure these issues sway people, but we have to do our best. I think the climate change issue is important, and thank you for bringing it up. You take a look at Florida, they're seeing 2 hurricanes in a short period of time. You'd think and hope that people would make the connection to climate change, and that one candidate is calling it a hoax and the other is trying to do something about it. So I try to do my little part with op-eds and an occasional letter. And I hope what you're talking about, getting medical professionals, it's really, I'm singing Norbert's song, medical professionals, nurses and doctors are respected, getting them to voice the concerns of our community in regard to election is very helpful.
Yeah, so anyone can share any of those. And we know that doctors and nurses actually vote less than our peers. So don't assume that because your colleagues are educated and understand the importance that they're voting. Many aren't for a wide variety of reasons. So encourage your colleagues as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to turn to Dr. Voorhees, who I haven't seen in a while. So thank you so much for joining. And you're going to have the last question or comment.
Oh boy, thank you. Okay, hi. So I'm from Maine and I'm a Bernie bro and a Physicians for National Health Plan, et cetera, stuff like that. So this is a question to Dr. Sun. It's a two-part question. One, have you had quote unquote public legislative experience before? And okay, number two is, how do you think your training as an emergency physician, I'm an emergency physician, how do you think your training as an emergency physician has helped you understand the dynamics of complex situations, always on the move, and having multiple problems to deal with at the same time? In other words, you are a primed and trained multitasker who has a good understanding of the environment around you, has to keep alert to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you sell your emergency physician training as an excellent field of preparation for your public advocacy? If you can run an ER, you can run a city. How's that?
Great, thanks. I'll use that right now. I mean, I tend to tell people, I see the entire emergency room. I see the entire city in my emergency rooms on a daily basis. Every type of New Yorker, every ethnicity, faith, ability, income levels, the greatest equalizer. And the structural failures of the city are manifested in the bodies of all my patients: cancer patients, gunshot victims, the assailant, and the perpetrator, cops, and even people who can't access their shelters. They come to the emergency room. If they get to the shelter too late and they're locked out, they come to us. Or people who don't feel safe in their relationships or their neighborhoods, public safety, they come to us. We got to take care of all of them, and then we got to make sure when they get discharged, they never have to come back here again. Just like preventing recurrent crises once you manage or stabilize a city system. So I kind of like think about an ER doctor is their job is to manage crises, not just a per patient by patient basis, but also for the entire city that visits the hospital. I take the patient's complaints, just like the complaints of the city, act as a voice of the people, advocate for them, and connect them to the correct services within the hospital, advocating for that patient so they get admitted or they have a follow-up, selling that story so that the specialist can take care of their needs immediately, or if not, schedule something if they were to be discharged, and managing the flow of that so the hospital stays afloat and doesn't collapse under the weight of too many patients coming in. That is the role as an emergency room doctor. And I'm a little biased, as you can agree, we're the only specialty that has to learn about every other specialty. We're the only one that reads papers in cardiology and orthopedics and endocrinology. We have to keep up to date on all of them, all these emergencies, so we can speak the language of all the services that do not relatively communicate as much as we do. And that's the public advocate's role, who's second to the mayor. You have to engage with every city services, but then be on the bully pulpit to advocate for the needs of the voice of the people for the city, connecting them to the correct services in a way that is symbiotic. We're not here to burn bridges, but rather to find common place. Where I have this ambitious plan as an ER doctor, they worked in all the city, to now as a candidate, returning to those very safe neighborhoods, going from neighborhood to neighborhood, town hall style, chair in the room, where I'll be speaking to the needs of those neighborhoods through the lens of what they need through the social determinants of health, with data and historical narratives, and being able to see from all of that, to find maybe bills that all these neighborhoods have their own unique but very similar problems and solutions, and finding bills that encompass multiple neighborhoods that speak to that. And then what I imagine as public advocate, speaking to the city council members and community boards as if there were specialty services in the hospital, and finding common ground where we all can work on a legislation together to benefit multiple neighborhoods. Because if you see them in silos, which that's what the world they live in as a specialist in their neighborhoods. My job is to have them see the big picture and find a win-win solution that benefits not only their constituents, but also the city as a whole with these multiple bills. And that's what emergency room doctors do, especially mass casualty incidents.
Yeah.
And then to your first question, if you can tell the way I talk, I've been an activist since I was 15. I've been involved in nonprofits, and I was a director of a 501c3 national nonprofit for people of color. And we did a lot of lobbying and advocating for legislation that ended up up for a vote, whether it was local elections or in DC, especially, and doing summits for our students to attend, learning about the process of how a bill becomes law.
But Norbert, if I could, one, get that down to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Number two, quote unquote, I think the question will come, have you had, quote, elected office? Okay, so I think the ED preparation, training, multitasking is part of the answer to that. Three, I don't think I'd call them crises. I'd refer to them as problems.
Okay.
And number four, when it comes to law enforcement, you and I have seen stunning, wonderful, mature law enforcement in difficult situations. And that's the majority. But we've also seen some folks who under stress are not prepared to be public servant law enforcement. That's how I would sort of, anyway, that's the phraseology I would use, shall we say, in that particular issue is there are cops out there who are golden, really public servants, but there are some in stressful situations probably shouldn't be law enforcement. Take that for what it's worth. Otherwise,
you.
good job.
On that note, I like to start on time and I like to end on time. We're actually ending at 8:02. I really want to thank both Dan Stone and Calvin Sun for really a fascinating hour. Like I said already, I'm the lucky one to have started this organization 6 years ago. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I consider myself lucky to know a number of you. So those of you I don't know, I look forward to getting to know you better. And please take to heart everything that Calvin and Dan talked about, and let's win this election and move on from there to win further important policies. Thank you again, and have a good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Norbert.
Everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
to meet you, Calvin.
Norbert.
Thanks,
Daniel,
Robert.
your question.